The 2026 FIFA World Cup was supposed to be America's moment. 78 matches, 11 cities, the biggest sporting event in the history of the United States, a tournament that would finally, definitively plant football at the center of American sports culture. The final at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, the semifinals in Dallas and Atlanta, the whole world coming to America. That was the plan. That was the pitch. That was what the United States Soccer Federation signed up for when it joined hands with Canada and Mexico back in 2017 and won the right to host this tournament. But something unexpected is happening, something that nobody in the American football establishment quite anticipated. And it's not a crisis, it's not a cancellation, it's not a logistical failure or a political collapse. It's something quieter than that, and in some ways more significant. Canada and Mexico are stealing the show. Not on purpose, not as a strategy, but through something that no amount of infrastructure spending or marketing can manufacture: passion, history, and the kind of football culture that doesn't need to be explained to anyone who already understands it. So the question that's worth asking right now, 35 days before the opening whistle, is this one. When the history of the 2026 World Cup is written, who will it actually belong to? If you want to keep following this story as it develops over the next few weeks, it would mean a lot to have you subscribed. There's a lot more to come. Now, let's start at the beginning, because the story of how we got here is more layered than most people realize. 7 years ago, when FIFA awarded the 2026 World Cup to the joint bid from Canada, Mexico, and the United States, the framing was straightforward. This was going to be the biggest World Cup in history. 48 teams for the first time, 104 matches, 3 countries, 3 sets of stadiums, 1 continent. And the numbers backed up that framing completely. The United States would host 78 of those 104 matches. The final would be in New Jersey, the semifinals in American cities, the quarterfinals in American cities. From the round of 16 onward, the entire tournament would shift south of the Canadian border and north of the Mexican one. That was the design. Here's where things start to get interesting. The tournament hasn't started yet, and already the narrative is running in a different direction. Mexico City gets the opening match. That's not a small thing. The opening match of a World Cup is one of the most watched broadcasts on Earth. Billions of people tune in. And the image that opens this tournament, the image that sets the tone for everything that follows, is not an American stadium. It's the Estadio Azteca. Think about what that means for a moment. The Azteca isn't just a stadium. It's arguably the most storied football venue on the planet. This will be the 3rd World Cup it has hosted, an achievement that no other stadium has ever achieved in the history of the sport. It hosted the 1970 final, one of the most celebrated matches in football history. It hosted the 1986 tournament, the one that gave the world Diego Maradona at his absolute peak. The Hand of God goal, the goal of the century, both happened in Mexico. Both are stitched permanently into the fabric of what this sport means to humanity. And on June 11, 2026, that stadium will host the opening match of the most expansive World Cup ever staged. The eyes of the world will be on Mexico first. That's not a displacement. That's not a political statement. That's just what happens when you put the opening match of a global sporting event inside a stadium that carries more football history than any other building on Earth. But Mexico's advantage isn't only about the Azteca. It's about something that's harder to quantify and more powerful for that reason. Football in Mexico isn't a sport. It's a cultural identity. It's the way that nation understands itself. The Liga MX regularly fills stadiums of 60 and 70,000 people for domestic club matches. When El Tri plays at the Azteca, the noise is something that visitors describe as physically overwhelming, not just loud. Overwhelming. The kind of atmosphere that television cannot capture no matter how good the broadcast technology gets. And now, those fans, the most passionate in the tournament's host territory, get to watch their team play their group stage matches on home soil against South Africa, South Korea, and the Czech Republic, in games where El Tri will be the roaring favorite, in a group that most analysts believe Mexico can top if they play to their potential. Mexico has reached the quarterfinals twice in their history. Both times, 1970 and 1986, the World Cup was held in Mexico. That's not a coincidence that Mexican football supporters have missed. It's a fact they've been talking about since the day the 2026 fixture list was confirmed. History doesn't repeat automatically. Football doesn't work that way, but the conditions are in place for Mexico to make a run in this tournament that would capture the attention of the entire football world. And the atmosphere in those Mexican host cities, if that run develops, it would be something genuinely unlike anything this tournament has seen in decades. Now let's talk about Canada, because this is the part of the story that most international football observers haven't fully absorbed yet. Canada's football history is, on paper, almost entirely without success. 3 World Cup appearances, 0 wins, 2 goals scored across the first 2 tournaments combined. In 1986, in Mexico, they conceded 5 and didn't score once. In 2022, in Qatar, they were eliminated early despite having qualified as the top team in CONCACAF, a genuine disappointment that stung across the country. But that context is precisely what makes 2026 feel different. Because the Canada that takes the field on June 12th at BMO Field in Toronto is a completely different animal from the one that failed in Qatar. Jesse Marsh, the American manager who took the job in May 2024, has built something that looks, for the first time in the program's history, like a squad with real depth. Jonathan David, who moved to Juventus in CDR, is playing some of the best football of his career. He was named Canada Soccer's Men's Player of the Year in 2025. He has goals in him. He has the mentality to deliver on the biggest stage. Alphonso Davies, one of the most dangerous fullbacks in world football at Bayern Munich, gives Canada an attacking dimension from deep that very few nations at this tournament can match. Ismail Kone, playing with intensity and intelligence at Sassuolo in Italy, has emerged as the kind of midfield presence that can control a game at the highest level. And the group they're in is genuinely winnable. Group B, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Qatar, Switzerland. There are no former World Cup winners in that group, no current European champions, no South American giant. Canada are tipped by multiple analysts to reach the knockout stages for the first time in their history. And in the expanded format, with the top 3 from each group advancing, they have more margin for error than at any previous tournament. But here's the angle that matters most when we talk about Canada displacing the United States from the narrative spotlight. The home matches are in Toronto and Vancouver, 2 of the most multicultural cities on Earth. Cities where football, not hockey, not basketball, not American football, is the sport that represents the full range of people who actually live there. When Canada plays at BMO Field in Toronto in a World Cup, the crowd won't be a generic sports crowd. It will be a mosaic. Communities who have been waiting their whole lives to watch their country compete at the game their grandparents grew up playing. Flags from 50 different nations, all cheering for one team. That is a story that writes itself. If Canada wins even one match at this tournament, and the expectation is that they can win more than one, the eruption in those Canadian cities will be something that global football remembers for a generation. It will be the kinds of moment that doesn't happen in a sport where one country wins every time. It happens when a team punches through a ceiling they've been pressed against for 40 years. Now, that's not to say the United States is an irrelevant part of this tournament. That's clearly not the case. The USA hosts 78 matches. The final is at MetLife. The American team, under Mauricio Pochettino, has genuine quality, with Christian Pulisic leading a squad that has grown significantly since the embarrassment of missing the 2018 World Cup entirely. The sheer commercial and logistical scale of the American operation is unprecedented. The ticket market alone tells you everything. The average resale price across the tournament is tracking at over $1,500 per match, making this the most expensive World Cup in history. Over 500 million ticket requests were made across the official sales phases. That scale is American. That commercial power is American. The infrastructure, the broadcasting deals, the sponsorship architecture, all of that reflects the fact that this tournament is built around the American market. But scale and story are different things. The United States soccer team is drawn in Group D, alongside Paraguay, Turkey, and Australia. It's a group they're expected to navigate successfully, but it doesn't contain the kind of fixture that generates a moment. It doesn't have the iconic opponent, the historical rivalry, the crowd atmosphere that produces the image the whole world shares the morning after. The image the whole world will share the morning of June 11th is the Azteca under lights, 80,000 people in the stands, Mexico in white, South Africa in yellow, the opening whistle of the 48th edition of the FIFA World Cup and the first ever hosted by 3 nations simultaneously. That image belongs to Mexico. And if Canada pulls off something historic in the knockout stages on Canadian soil, if Jonathan David scores the goal that sends Les Rouges through for the first time ever, that image belongs to Canada. Where does the United States feature in the visual memory of this tournament? In the stadiums, absolutely. In the logistical achievement, absolutely. In the final, which MetLife will host on July 19th, absolutely, regardless of who is playing in it. But the emotional spine of this tournament, the moments that people will replay, the nights that redefined what football means on this continent. Right now, the early signs suggest those moments are being written in Mexico City and Toronto, not in New York, not in Los Angeles, not in Dallas. And that is a genuinely unexpected development in a tournament that was designed quite deliberately to use football as a way of showing the world what American sports infrastructure can deliver. This is where a historical comparison becomes useful, because what's happening in 2026 has a precedent, not an exact one, but close enough to be instructive. Cast your mind back to the 2002 World Cup co-hosted by Japan and South Korea. Going into that tournament, Japan was the larger economy, the more globally prominent nation, the country with more matches allocated, the country expected to dominate the narrative. South Korea was the co-host, but in a supporting role in terms of global football standing and commercial weight. But what actually happened in 2022? South Korea reached the semifinals. They became the first Asian team ever to do so. Their matches in Seoul and Suwon generated some of the most extraordinary crowd atmospheres in World Cup history. The image of 1 million South Korean fans in the streets of Seoul in red, chanting, watching on outdoor screens. That became the defining visual of that tournament globally. Japan hosted games, Japan played decent football, Japan had their moments, but the narrative spine of 2022 belonged to South Korea. Nobody planned it that way. It wasn't a conspiracy or a deliberate reallocation of focus. It was just what happened when a team found its moment and a nation found its voice inside a tournament that gave them the stage to do it. The 2026 version of that story is still being written. We don't know yet how Canada's group stage matches will go. We don't know whether El Tri will truly run in Mexico City. Football doesn't follow scripts, but the structural conditions are in place for a similar dynamic. A co-host with history and passion, Mexico. A co-host with a nation hungry for its first moment, Canada. And a primary host with enormous logistical capacity, genuine commercial dominance, but a football culture that is still, in many American cities, fighting for the space that hockey and basketball and American football currently occupy. That cultural gap doesn't make the United States a bad host. Far from it. The organization has been extraordinary in scale, even with the challenges around security funding and the complications of the travel environment for international visitors. But it does mean that the spontaneous, organic, unmanufactured emotional energy of this tournament is more likely to erupt in Mexico City and Toronto than in Dallas or Los Angeles. And spontaneous emotional energy is what makes a World Cup truly great. Let's bring this into the human level, though, because all of this analysis only matters when you connect it to the actual experience of the players and fans who will live through this summer. Think about what it means for a Mexican player to walk out at the Azteca in a World Cup group match. Those players have grown up watching footage of 1986, of Maradona, of the quarterfinal against West Germany that Mexico lost on penalties in front of 110,000 people, of the history that lives in that concrete. When Raúl Jiménez leads the line for El Tri on June 11th, he's not just walking into a football match. He's walking into a chapter of a story that started before he was born. And think about what it means for Alphonso Davies, the son of Liberian refugees who grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, a player who has become one of the most celebrated footballers on the planet. To play a World Cup match on Canadian soil, in the country that gave his family a home, in a city like Toronto that is a living portrait of what immigration can build. That is not just a sports story. That is something bigger. These are the kinds of human narratives that travel, that get shared, that make someone in Buenos Aires or Lagos or Seoul sit up and pay attention to a tournament they might have otherwise been indifferent to. The United States has great players. Christian Pulisic is a genuine talent. The American squad under Pochettino is the most technically accomplished it has been in many years. But the personal narrative that surrounds them doesn't have that same cultural electricity right now. It doesn't have the weight of history meeting the present moment in quite the same way. So, where does all of this leave us looking ahead to June 11th and the weeks that follow? The realistic picture is nuanced. Mexico and Canada will both face genuine competitive tests. Switzerland are a strong outfit and will challenge Canada in Group B. Mexico's group is more open, but no World Cup match is guaranteed. The quarterfinals and beyond will be in American cities regardless of who gets there. The final at MetLife will be the biggest single sporting event in years, whoever plays in it. And if the United States team runs deep into the knockout stages on home soil, the American narrative reasserts itself immediately and powerfully. The USMT reaching a semifinal in New York would be one of the defining sporting moments in American history. Don't underestimate what that team, under the right circumstances, is capable of. But the best-case scenario for all three host nations isn't a competition between them. It's a version of this tournament where Canada wins their first World Cup match in Toronto with scenes of national jubilation, where Mexico runs to the quarterfinal in front of their own fans and does something this generation has never experienced, and where the United States reaches the latter stages and gives 40 million football fans a reason to stay up until midnight watching the knockout rounds. That's the version of the 2026 World Cup that FIFA dreamed of when they accepted this tri-nation bid. That's the version where everyone wins, where the whole continent wins. But whether football delivers that version is, as always, uncertain. The ball is round, the margins are small, the giant can fall, the underdog can roar. But what's already clear, before a single competitive ball is kicked, is that the 2026 World Cup is not as straightforwardly American as its original framing suggested. Mexico and Canada have arrived at this tournament with something the numbers don't capture. They have hunger. They have history meeting opportunity. They have the kind of motivated home support that has, in previous World Cups, driven teams far beyond where anyone expected them to go. The United States has the infrastructure, the commercial machine, the logistical scale, the final. But the story, the emotional story that gets told for decades, right now, that story is being written elsewhere. And that, to anyone who loves football, is exactly why this tournament is worth watching. Let us know in the comments, do you think Canada or Mexico will make the bigger statement at this World Cup? And if you had to predict which host nation goes deepest, which one would you back? Drop your prediction below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because this tournament is only just beginning. And as always, football never stays quiet for long. See you in the next one.